The sun had just started to dip behind the hills, when the drums of the festival began echoing through the village, the scent of grilled meat and wood. Smoke curled through the air, children darted between stands chasing each other with sparklers, while old men passed bottles and told stories of wolves and ghosts and the old witch in the woods. The sky was clear until it wasn't. Without warning, the clouds parted in a clean line like someone had sliced the sky with a sword. No thunder, no wind. No warning, a silent flash of violet light cut through the atmosphere and something massive appeared overhead. It did not fall, it hovered motionless and impossibly large. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, its edges too straight to perfect, to belong to any plane or satellite. The crowd stared in silence, all laughter. Stopped phones lifted into the air, but none of them worked. No signal, no sound, not even birds flew. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. From beneath the floating monolith, a smaller shape descended slowly like a god, choosing to step onto the soil of mortals. It touched down beyond the edge of the village, deep in the forest. The trees around it bent and shimmered from the heat or the energy, or maybe just from fear. Then the figure emerged, tall and unblinking, armored in something that looked like glass and gold. Fused together, he walked like gravity meant nothing to him. His footsteps left no prints, his eyes glowed with something that looked like galaxies caught in fire. Stood at the tree line and raised one hand, not in greeting but in declaration. His voice did not boom, but it filled every ear, across the village, across the woods, across the minds of those too far to see him. And yet suddenly, aware, I am the Galactic King. I have conquered the moons of Theros, the ice cities of Vorth. I have torn empires from the stars. I come now to your world to test its worth. Send me your strongest, your wisest, your most gifted, or I will erase this land and move on. The villagers did not move, they did not scream, they simply watched, not knowing if they were dreaming or caught in some cruel vision. The children stood at the edge of the field, eyes wide, caught between fear and wonder, but none dared step forward. Not yet. The Galactic King waited, his arms crossed, his armor humming like a living thing. The air around him shimmered as if the forest itself feared to breathe too loudly. The world kept turning, but this place had been carved out of time and dropped into a space between moments, and still no one came. Not the military, not the scientists, not the men in black suits with clipped accents and cold eyes. No helicopters, no sirens, no tanks, only the wind through the fields and the low beat of drums still echoing in the distance like a heartbeat that refused to stop. And then 4 children began to walk, not pushed, not pulled, not ordered by anyone, but drawn by something ancient inside them, something older than fear, something they did not understand but felt in their bones, in the rhythm of their breath, in the sudden stillness of the forest that seemed to lean in as they passed. The Galactic King turned and saw them coming, and he smiled. The village remained silent as the 4 children walked away from the crowd, leaving behind mothers holding their breath and fathers frozen in place. Their names were Luca, Elena, Miroslav, and Sophia, none older than 13, all different in ways no one ever quite noticed until now. They did not speak to each other as they walked, but each step felt perfectly timed, as if their feet moved to a song only they could hear. Luca led with his hands in his pockets, his eyes narrow, his shoulders tense. Light bent strangely around him, casting shadows that didn't match the sun. Elena followed barefoot as always, her dress trailing behind her, as birds flew low over her head, circling in silence. Her hair wild as the forest. Miroslav lagged slightly, behind, his eyes flickering with something sharp. He had never been caught in a game of hide and seek. Not once. He always vanished, even in plain sight. And Sophia was last, walking slowly with her fingers trailing through the tall grass, her lips moving in whispers that made no sound to anyone but the wind. Galactic King watched them approach and tilted his head, not out of respect but curiosity, the way a predator might study an unfamiliar prey. The village behind them remained frozen, as if the entire world had agreed to pause and witnessed whatever was about to happen. Children stepped past the first line of trees, and the forest swallowed them whole. The light dimmed, the sound shifted, even the air changed, growing heavy and slow, like walking through water. The ship above remained silent, watching from above, like an eye that never blinked. The path that had always been clear now, twisted roots curved upward as if to trip them, vines slithered across the dirt like snakes. But the children did not stop. They moved with purpose, even if they didn't yet understand what it was. Elena knelt once and placed her hand on the soil. The vines calmed, the wind held its breath, the path cleared ahead. Without a word, Miroslav touched the shadows and vanished for a moment, only to reappear farther ahead. Without breaking stride, Luca walked through a patch of thick mist and came out the other side, dry, without a single leaf on his clothes, Sophia listened to the breeze and adjusted their path by a few steps, avoiding a hole. None of them had seen they reached the edge of a clearing, and stood still. The Galactic King waited on a black stone platform that had not been there before, carved with symbols from a language not of this world. Behind him, strange machines floated, pulsing with energy, scanning the children with invisible light. "You are not warriors," the king said, his voice smooth and deep like oil on fire. "You are not wise, nor strong. You are not what I asked for. And yet you come." The children said nothing. "Will test you," he continued, "not with weapons, not with war, but with what lies inside, for that is where true power hides." With a flick of his hand, the ground vanished beneath them, and they fell into the void. Did not scream, they did not panic, because somehow they all knew this was only the beginning. They did not hit the ground when they fell, because there was no ground, only endless space shifting beneath their feet like water that forgot how to be. Wet stars blinked in and out, entire galaxies spun around them, as if the universe itself had been folded into a dream they could walk through. The four children floated together, weightless yet grounded, drifting across a bridge of light that had no beginning or end. Each step forward revealed something different for Luca. The path turned into mirrors, each one showing a version of himself he had never seen. Versions where he was angry, versions where he was cruel, versions where he stood alone in darkness with eyes that burned like the king's. He clenched his fists and stepped through them, shattering every image until the mirrors gave way to a path of gold for Elena. The space around her changed into a forest. Not just any forest, but her forest, the one behind her house where she spent hours every day talking to birds and following animal trails. Only now the animals spoke back in words, not chirps or growls. They asked her questions, strange questions. Why do you walk with them? Why do you protect them? Why do you care? She did not answer with words. She simply reached out her hand and the forest cleared, letting her pass. Miroslav found himself in complete darkness, not the kind where you cannot see, but the kind where you forget light ever existed. He walked through it silently, barely breathing. Shadows flickered beside him, some reaching out, some retreating, all whispering pieces of his own thoughts. You hide because you are afraid. You vanish because you do not trust. He stopped and let the darkness wrap around him, not to escape but to become part of it. And when he opened his eyes, the darkness stepped back, bowing in silence. Sophia stood in the middle of 1,000 voices, each one her own, but different ages. Different moods, different fears. Some screamed, some laughed, some cried. One voice called her weak, another called her lost, another told her she would never matter. She closed her eyes and listened to them all until their chaos turned into a rhythm, and she began to hum a song her mother used to sing, and the voices faded into harmony. The four children emerged. They stood once more in the clearing, but now it was different. The trees leaned away from them. The air shimmered. The platform beneath the Galactic King cracked slightly under their gaze. His machines beeped in confusion, the scans unreadable. The data corrupted. You are not what you seem, the king said, more to himself than to them. His fingers twitched. His armor pulsed like it was breathing. His smile. Vanishetti have tested minds before. I have bent rulers to dust, but never have I seen mortals walk through the soul and come back. Halith children said nothing, but something in the air changed. Something old and patient stirred deep beneath the roots of the forest, watching, listening, waiting. King stepped back, and for the first time since he arrived, his eyes narrowed with something close to fear. The Galactic King raised his hand, and the world around them unraveled. The forest fell away. Like ash in the wind, the sky fractured into shards of light, and the ground bent inward into itself, folding space and time into a new shape. The children stood at the edge of something that was not a place, but a trial. The platform beneath them turned into a bridge, suspended over nothing, held up by moving shapes that shifted like smoke and stone and steel. This is your path, the king said. Each step is a question, each breath is a door. You must walk alone. You must walk as you are, and only as you. Arithi. Children looked at each other, and then they nodded without speaking and stepped forward one by one as the bridge split into 4 directions, each road twisting into its own strange reality. Luca walked into a tunnel of glass where reflections ran ahead of him, sometimes smiling, sometimes crying, sometimes bleeding. The glass whispered secrets he had never told anyone, about how he once hid when his sister needed help, how he lied to save himself. He kept walking, eyes fixed ahead, ignoring every voice, every trick, every guilt. Elena's path led her through a wasteland of burned trees and broken wings. Birds fell from the sky as she passed, their feathers turning into ash. Animals called to her with empty eyes, asking why she let them die. The path trembled as wind howled through dead branches, but she kept moving, placing her hand on every fallen creature, and whispering not with words, but with hope, until the wind softened and the trees stopped burning. Miroslav entered a corridor where doors stretched forever down a long cold hallway, each door opened with a memory behind it, some real, some twisted. His first day at school, where no one spoke to him, the day he saw something terrible in the woods, and told no one. The night he cried alone under his bed, thinking no one would ever care. He shut each door calmly and kept walking, until the corridor began to dissolve behind him, unable to hold him any more. Sophia's path turned upward, spiraling into a sky made of sound. Every step echoed with voices both known and unknown. They told her she was too small, too fragile, too quiet to matter, but she sang back with her heart, not with words, with feelings, memories, laughter from her brother, the warmth of her grandmother's hand, stories told by firelight. And as she walked, the sky began to sing with her, until the path opened like a flower and brought her down safely, returned to the clearing. All, for at the same time none had spoken, none had seen the others, but something inside them now pulsed in harmony. The Galactic King stood still, his armor flickering as if rejecting his command. His machines began to spark, their readings unreadable. Blue, are not bound by the laws of power. You are not shaped by the limits of fear. You are shaped by something older, something. The Perth children did not answer, but the forest did its roots, shifting, the wind growing sharp. Something moved in the trees, something ancient that did not like what it was. Herein the king turned his head slightly, and for the first time he realized he might not be the one in control. The Galactic King stood in silence, watching the four children, who now glowed faintly with something the machines could not scan, something beyond logic, beyond calculation. His fingers flexed slowly, his gaze swept the forest as if looking for what he could not name. Something had shifted, and even the air felt older, heavier. A breath clearing around them began to change. The trees swayed without wind, their branches curling like fingers, their roots rising just slightly out of the ground like they were listening. The grass lay flat as if bowing, and the sky above began to flicker, not with stars, but with symbols, massive ancient symbols, made of light that turned slowly in silence. Suluka stepped forward first, not speaking, just watching the ground as it cracked slightly beneath his foot, not from weight but from reaction. The earth recognized him. Alina placed her hand on the nearest tree, and its bark shimmered like water. Miroslav crouched and vanished for a second, then reappeared behind the Galactic King, staring up at him without blinking. Sophia closed her eyes and tilted her head, listening not to the king but to the trees, to the roots, to something. Bellowit was then. The sound began low, at first like a drum being struck in the very bones of the forest, a deep thump that echoed through the soil, through the air, through their chests. It was not thunder, it was not footsteps. It was something waking, something that had been buried, not beneath the earth but beneath memory. Galactic King turned slowly, his voice colder now than it had been. You are not alone here, he said, not to the children but to the woods, not with anger but with understanding. I know this feeling. I have felt it once before, in the ruins of the Black Sun Temple, where gods fell screaming into Stoneth. Forest did not answer with words, but with breath. The trees exhaled a deep mist that rolled across the ground like fog, and within it something began to move, not walk, not slither, but drift, like a shadow trying to remember how to be human. The temperature dropped, not suddenly, but gradually, like a creeping chill that wrapped around the heart and squeezed without violence, without haste, only certainty. Ella looked up first, her eyes widening just slightly. The others followed, and even the Galactic King paused as a crooked silhouette emerged from the fog, tall, thin, wrapped in layers of what might once have been cloth or moss or smoke. A figure with hair like tangled roots and eyes that burned like dying stars. A figure who walked not with steps, but with presence. Baba Yaga had Aravet's Galactic King lowered his arm, slowly, not in surrender, but in recognition. The old witch of the forgotten woods, the nightmare from children's tales, the guardian of thresholds and devourer of fools. She was not supposed to be real, not here, but the forest had called her, the children had awakened her, and now she stood between the king and his test. Not as a savior, not as a threat, but as a storm that would not be named. The fog thickened around her, as if afraid to touch her fully. The air froze in place. The wind stopped entirely. The trees bent in reverence or fear, or both. The children stood still, their eyes wide, their breathing shallow. They had heard stories, all their lives, stories whispered by grandparents around firelight, stories about the witch in the woods, the eater of liars, the judge of souls, the one who flew in a house made of bones and fire with legs of a giant bird, but they had never believed, not really, until no Baba Yaga was taller than they imagined, not with size but with presence. Her body was wrapped in layers of tattered cloths that moved like smoke, her fingers long and thin held. A crooked staff carved from something that might once have been living. Her face was lined like tree bark, and her eyes held no color, only the glow of embers pressed deep into earth. She did not walk, she simply moved forward, as if the earth adjusted to carry her with every step. Galactic King stepped back, not because he was afraid but because he recognized something. He had seen a force like this once, long ago. On a planet where the sky bled gold and the stones whispered warnings. This was not a woman, this was not a sorcerer, this was a force of balance, of judgment, of ancient contract. You are far from your throne, which he said, his voice careful and quiet. Your power does not reach the stars, you are legend, not. La Baba Yaga tilted her head, her hair coiling like vines. Her voice came like rusted iron sliding across stone, quiet but heavy. She is not far, she said. She never left, and neither did they, and she pointed toward the children, who now stood behind her as if they had always belonged. Pharaoh came here to test a world, to weigh its worth in strength, in fear, in pride. But you forget, said Baba Yaga, that there are things older than stars and heavier than crowns, and these children are not yours to measure. The Galactic King raised one hand, light pulsed from his armor. The ground trembled, the air cracked, but he did not strike because somewhere deep inside a warning had begun to grow. Something told him that this path led to ruin, and he remembered for the first time in a long time what it felt like to hesitate. Children remained silent, but something in their stance had changed. No longer uncertain, no longer overwhelmed, they stood now as if they were four corners of one ancient symbol, their presence echoing the rhythm of the forest itself. Sophia's fingers danced with wind, Luca's shadow stretched across stone, Elena's breath moved. The leaves, Miroslav's eyes glowed with hidden stars. Baba Yaga stepped forward again, her voice a whisper that filled the world. You have challenged, many kings have fallen to your hand, many planets burned beneath your gaze. But you have never met a mother who guards her children with teeth and song and fusion. The forest roared. The Galactic King stood, his hand still raised, but he did not attack. The glow from his armor dimmed slightly as he stared at the children, and then at Baba Yaga, his mind racing through memories of conquest and chaos, through victories carved into the bones of forgotten galaxies. But none of them prepared him for this, for a force that did not bow to strength or reason or fear. Baba Yaga stepped to the center of the clearing, her staff tapping gently against the stone. Though the sound echoed like thunder through the forest, her eyes never left the king as she began to speak, and with each word the trees leaned closer, the ground breathed, and the sky above them darkened into a deep swirling blue like the ocean preparing to swallow the sun. These children were not born by chance, she said, her voice ancient and slow, not like a tale being told but like a law being written. They are not accidents, they are not random, they are starborn, each tied to a thread of the universe that has not been plucked for 1,000 years. They were hidden here beneath the roots of an old world, where the sky is thick with story, and the earth remembers the old songs, and I have watched them since their first breath. Galactic King narrowed his eyes, his armor reacting subtly to her words, reshaping along his arms as if readying for war, and still he did not speak. He placed them where no empire would look, said Baba Yaga, I fed them dreams in the cradle, and filled their silence with whispers. From the deep they learned to walk with animals, not men. They learned to see what is unseen and hear what is unspoken. And now they stand not as weapons, not as warriors, but as balance. Called forth because you broke the peace of old space. She turned, slowly, her eyes passing over Luca, Elena, Miroslav, and Sophia. Each child straightened, not from fear but from memory, as if something inside them unlocked something that had been waiting since before they were born. The Galactic King finally spoke, and his voice held no mockery, no threat, only curiosity, and maybe something older, something like respect. We hide them. Why shape them in secret? Why let them live as mortals among dirt and dust, when you could have made them rulers, when you could have trained them to strike at the heart of the stars? Baba Yaga gave a crooked smile, and her hair writhed like smoke, because stars burn too bright and rulers fall too fast, and mortals remember what gods forget. And if they were raised in palaces, they would never know the strength of standing alone. If they were made of steel, they would never learn to bend and survive it. King looked down at his own hand, his fingers curled into a fist, then slowly opened, and for a moment he saw not children, not threats, not tools, but echoes of something left. The The Galactic King lowered his hand, his eyes shifting from one child to the next. As the air thickened around him, his armor began to ripple with pulses of red and gold, as if reacting to something it could not contain, something ancient and volatile. His voice returned, but now it carried a different weight, not rage, not arrogance, but something slower, something close to pity. Have faced titans who swallowed stars, he said. I have battled queens whose blood could melt time itself, but you stand here with stories and silence and shadows, and tell me that I am not welcome. Baba Yaga did not move, her staff pressed against the earth, her eyes locked on the king, her presence vast and endless, as if she had been growing there for centuries, waiting for the moment when the stars would tremble again. You were warned, she said, her voice softer than before but sharper, like the edge of a frozen blade. You came to test. You came to weigh, but you came with no understanding of the soil beneath your feet or the sky above your head. You came to a world you do not know and woke a force you cannot measure. At the Galactic King stepped forward, the ground shattering beneath each step as light cracked around his form, his body now glowing with cosmic fire. The forest shook, trees bent, and branches snapped, as waves of heat rolled from him like the breath of dying suns, and in one breath, he struck a beam of energy, cut the air cleanly, a perfect line of destruction that tore through trees, through stone, through clouds, through silence. It should have destroyed her, should have left nothing but ash and dust, but Baba Yaga did not fall. She raised one finger and the beam shattered like glass against wind, her cloak whipped behind her, her hair burning white and her eyes flaring with light that belonged to a time before the stars. Her voice returned low and terrible and filled with fire. Bring fire to a storm, you bring light to a shadow that has already seen the end of all suns. You do not understand what you have to shed. Forest came alive around her, roots burst from the ground, coiling around the king's limbs. Like serpents made of bone and bark, rivers reversed their flow, rising into the air and wrapping around his armor like water seeking truth. The sky screamed as clouds twisted into faces, ancient faces, watching, judging, remembering. Children stood unmoved behind her, glowing now with the same power that pulsed through the earth. They did not shout, they did not run, they simply held their ground for anchors of something greater. Galactic King roared as the roots tightened, as his energy tried to tear free and found no purchase. His fire screamed into the sky, but the storm did not break, and in that moment, he understood, had not come to test the world, had come to be judged by it. The storm calmed, not with silence but with breath, the kind of breath that comes after something has passed, something vast and dangerous and final. The Galactic King knelt, now his armor broken in places, light dimming across its surface like a dying star. His hands hung at his sides, no longer clenched, not in surrender but in understanding. The roots uncoiled from his limbs. The air cleared, the trees stood tall once more, but the shadows around Baba Yaga remained thick and unmoved. She stood with the children behind her, her staff lowered, her eyes still burning but her voice soft again. Not like a mother scolding, not like a ruler declaring, but like the forest itself, speaking through her with the voice of soil and snow and sorrow. You are not the first to come seeking to measure what you cannot grasp, and you will not be the last, but remember this, your strength is not what breaks the world, your blindness is. The Galactic King lifted his eyes and looked at the children for the first time, truly looked, not with the gaze of a conqueror, not with the eyes of judgment, but as one who sees a future he is no longer part of, and yet wishes to protect. They did not glare, they did not smile, they simply stood and watched as the wind passed through them, and the stars above began to realign, stood slowly, the storm around him fading, as he turned to his ship, now hovering once again above the forest, like a memory that refused to vanish. A beam of light descended silently and wrapped around him, lifting him upward through the air until he vanished into the stars without another word. Children turned to Baba Yaga, their faces calm but their hearts filled with something new, not power, not pride, but memory, deep memory of a time before they understood what they were. Now they did, and there was no going back. Baba Yaga looked at them, not as students, not as weapons, but as seeds that had finally broken the earth and seen the sun. You are no longer hidden, she said, and the world will try to find you and shape you and fear you, but the forest is still your home, and it will. Remember, from that day the village returned to normal, the people slowly forgetting the light in the sky, the shaking ground, the cold that had crept into their bones. They spoke only in vague rumors and half-dreams, and in time even those faded, but the forest did not forget, and neither did the children. Aluka practiced bending light through mirrors of ice. Alina listened to the trees and the wolves that moved like wind. Miroslav learned how to vanish into the breath between heartbeats, and Sophia sang to the sky, and sometimes the stars sang back. Were not chosen to rule, they were chosen to protect, and under the watchful eye of a witch older than history they became the quiet guardians of a world that would never know how close it had come to burning. Gand, the house with chicken legs, walked through the woods at night, never too far, never too near, always watching.